Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be welcoming one of the great cult horror movie composers of horror, Chuck Cirino. He of course is also a filmmaker, producer, writer. He wears many, many hats in the film world, but he's composed scores for Jim Wynorski classics such as Chopping Mall, The Return of Swamp Thing, Deathstalker 2, 976 Evil 2. He was also the sound designer on Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And I'm having him on today to talk about all that stuff and a little bit of his filmmaking and what have you. I can't wait because he's a very talented composer. I especially love his score for The Return of Swamp Thing. It is just so beautiful. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen to it. It is just velvet. There's no other way of describing it. It's such a beautiful song. So, here is my interview with Chuck Cirino.
Hello.
Hey, Chuck, it's Tommy.
Hey, Tommy. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you, too. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Are we live, or is it Memorex? Just kidding.
Pre-record.
That's an old TV commercial.
Yeah.
Yes. Remember cassettes.
Yeah. It's such an honor. Thank you, sir, for taking time on such short notice on Halloween.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not really doing much. It's too windy down here in Southern California to go outside. And there's soot all over the place. So, well, maybe that's good for Halloween, okay? You know, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I thank you nevertheless. So, going back in time, did you gravitate towards music and movies early on?
Way early on. I have conversations all the time with my friend Jim Wynorski, who I've worked with quite a bit, and we kind of spar for who was influenced first. Well, he's 4 years older than me, so he was influenced first. But most of my music loving doesn't come from the radio. It comes from going to the theater and seeing films like Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, or anything with those early films with Bernard Herrmann really got me going. Born Free, the John Barry score. There were lots of early '60s things where I was only 10 or 11, but I noticed the music. Okay, it wasn't until a few years later in the mid '60s that I started actually realizing you could buy the recordings and play them on a record player. So I hope that answers that question for you.
Oh, yes.
I've always been. My father was a jazz musician, big band jazz musician, and we grew up in a musician family. And he didn't like rock and roll because he was a big band guy. So I respected him and didn't play the radio or play any rock and roll in the house. I would play movie scores, and he didn't really pay much attention to what I was listening to, but I really loved movie scores first. And it was much later on that I started to appreciate rock and roll, the Beatles, Elvis, and all that stuff. But at first it was TV themes and movie themes.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first movie you ever saw or the first album you ever bought?
I remember the first album. The first movie that I ever saw that I liked the music was The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And that was first run in the movie theater. I remember hearing that music and going, there's something special about that. Same thing with Mysterious Island. That was one that even more so than Seventh Voyage. I didn't have those albums. You couldn't get them. Mm-hmm. But the first album that I bought was a triple soundtrack, and it had Born Free on it because I went to see Born Free, and that really moved me. John Barry, his music was some of the first, along with Bernard. And I bought an album that had 3 scores on it, which I still have. The album's still in my collection here. It had Grand Prix by Maurice Jarre, and see what else is on there. Dr. Zhivago was on there too, along with Born Free. And so I got a sampling of those 3 scores. That was my first LP.
Nice. What was your first instrument?
Say again?
Your first instrument?
My first instrument was either the piano or the Hammond B3 organ. Since my father was a musician, between gigs he would store the organ at the house. And the organ was indeed a synthesizer. Okay, maybe people would argue that no, an electric organ isn't a synthesizer, but no, I was playing synth back in the mid-'60s. And my father also purchased the first drum machine, which was half the size of the refrigerator and had 8 buttons. Mm-hmm. And this drum machine would had like 8 different beats, and it would sit next to my father's Hammond, and I would sit there and play the Hammond organ with the drum beats. When the organ wasn't there, I had the piano. I had a piano at my grandmother's house and my house. I mean, you could not take me off the piano. Whenever I went anywhere, I would grab it. I would look for a piano. Hotels, bus stations, livery stables. Wherever I went, I looked for a piano. That was important. In high school, I picked up a trombone and started playing that. So through high school, I was, doing trombone, and I learned quite a few movie score things on the trombone and would play those. I remember learning the Prisoner theme on trombone. Uh-huh. Right, because it had a lot of good low brass in it. Mm-hmm. I was able to do that pretty well. I did some James Bond stuff. Ooh. It was the 007 theme, I think, from Dr. No that I played pretty good on the trombone. Those were my early instruments, and I really didn't play much else than that. I mean, anything else. And I really didn't study music. I was really more into actually being a filmmaker in those days. Music was just a hobby.
Mm-hmm. You're not a guitar guy?
No. I picked up a guitar once and strummed it a little bit. And, you can hire guitar people. Yeah. You can't hire somebody to do the keyboards the way I like them. Mm-hmm. It's a different technique than guitar.
Mm-hmm. According to my research, your first job was working at a public access station in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Blue Ridge Cable Television. It was a fluke too. I didn't know what. I got out of high school, and I went to Pennsylvania from Miami because I had a lot of friends there. I got a gig as a social director for a while. I was still making films. I made films all through high school, and I didn't know how I was going to get into it. I took some jobs as doing carpentry and working at a huge factory that made material. And then I was in a small town, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. And an ad came out in the classified saying, hey, technical director needed at the local public access station. Well, I had taken video classes in high school. We were the first high school in North Miami, to have actual video system. So I got this gig as not a station manager, but a technical director at Blue Ridge Cable Television. Mm-hmm. And back then, public access was very important and legally required by cable companies. And so we were required to do a lot of programming. We were very busy doing local football games, basketball games, high school. Mm-hmm. And that's I spent 6 years doing that, and I actually experimented with I bought a synthesizer while I worked there and used the video equipment to hone my multi-layering techniques early on by bouncing between VCRs, doing sound-on-sound synthesizer recording. And I had a show. I had my own public access show for a while that I did where I would sit there at the synthesizer and show video feedback and play my mini Korg synthesizer, and the name of the show was Sound Trek.
Wow.
I made about 7 episodes of just sitting there doing this wild, unlistenable synthesizer music. I don't know if anybody saw it, but I put it on the air. Mm-hmm. And that was my first foray into video and music. It was like early 70s or mid-70s.
Did they let you keep any copies of the tapes?
Well, I kept everything when I left there. I made copies for myself. All the tapes dissolved basically in time. Brought them out to California. It was very dry. They didn't store well. I transferred a few things. I had a lot of independent programming I did there on my own. I made my own science fiction TV series called Tales from the Earthfather that I starred in. I shot that. They were half-hour episodes, and those I have bits and pieces of those, but no entire episodes, just clips. And I didn't score those. I would actually use real film music. There was nobody was watching the music on public access, so I could use Jerry Goldsmith or Ennio Morricone or anyone I wanted to score my TV series, and nobody cared.
Yeah.
So I didn't score it myself, believe it or not. I was used real score music at the time.
Oh God, that's funny.
I wish I still had the whole episodes because I was so green. I had no experience filmmaking, or it was all just, hey, here's a bunch of equipment, now learn it. And that's how I learned television and music and everything. I did not go to school for it. It was all practical experience.
Oh.
That's how, and it was at Blue Ridge Cable. A lot of it started at Blue Ridge Cable Television, where eventually I was the only employee there because they were downsizing. I could do everything. So they fired everybody, kept me there as station manager, and it was seventh heaven. I was there for 3 years, 6 years altogether, but 3 years only playing with video. And I did my job on the side, which was doing the interviews, the football games, the basketball games, the shows. But then I'd be there at night playing my synthesizer or doing Tales from the Earthfather. I did a lot of early visual effects there, too, with video. And Starlog Magazine did a feature on me because I was doing video effects. It's still out there. I think it's Starlog 5 or something.
Wow, that's really cool. You had a little bit of local fame there going.
I had it back then, and it's like, it was fun, but I didn't really concentrate on any one thing in filmmaking, right? It was always bouncing from either directing or writing or editing or shooting and music. And you try to mix music with all that other stuff, and people don't understand you. It's like, oh, I don't understand you. You're either one or the other. People love to categorize you into one thing, and I've been fighting that all my life. I will not be part of their puzzle. I'm making my own puzzle.
That's good. That's a really good attitude. What year did you move to LA?
It was 79, I think. 78 or 79. I really can't. I get it straight in my head every once in a while. Then I go back and I go, well, what year was it? It was right after Star Wars came out, because I drove an hour to see Star Wars from Stroudsburg to somewhere in New Jersey to see it first run. I was looking forward to this film quite a bit. I mean, I cut out articles about it. I put them on the wall. Star Wars is coming out. Star Wars is coming out. I don't know what this is, but it's going to be great. So I went to see it. I sat in the theater alone watching this film going, I'm going to Hollywood. They need me out there.
Yeah.
Because my thrust was to get involved with the visual effects on Star Wars. So I sent, are you editing this? Because I'm trying to think of his name. You're going to have to cut this. John Dykstra. So I read the credits of Star Wars in the theater, and I wrote John Dykstra a letter going, and I sent him my reel of Tales from the Earthfather. And I said, I want to work in visual effects. And he said, well, we're looking for people. Come on out. And a letter, he wrote back to me. So I got my act together, went out there to look for a job, came out here to look for a job. And John Dykstra was on vacation.
Oh.
Couldn't see me. So I got the Yellow Pages. There was no internet then. So I got a hold of the Yellow Pages and went to video production companies and started at the end of I started at V. And by the time I got to V, I had a job. Videography Studios hired me. Bob Kiger. He 6 months after that trip, he flew me to California, and that was it. I stayed here.
Mm-hmm. And did you admit?
So that's how I got out here, was because I wrote a letter to John Dykstra. He answered me and says, come on out. You're hired. got out here. He's on vacation, so I wanted to find a job right away. So videography studios where I did the same kind of thing I did at Blue Ridge Cable. I was the editor there, but I had access to all the equipment on weekends and at night. So I'd go in and experiment. And it's always like you couldn't buy the toys back then. You couldn't buy a camera back then, video camera. You couldn't buy all that gear. You had to either rent it or you had to have it at your disposal. Today is a lot different. You can go use your phone, make a movie if you want. Not back then. You had to literally get yourself into a position where you had access to the equipment, and none of that was very easy. You had to work at a TV station or a studio or have the money to rent it. So I was very fortunate to have people around me, like Bob Kiger, like the people at Blue Ridge Cable, that allowed me to go in and play with this stuff. It was in lieu of going to college for it, which I think was so much better than going to college, because it's 20 years of experience rather than just 2, and you're practically working with the gear, experimenting. You don't end up with the same kind of sensibilities as someone who goes to college, but I feel like that's, when you go to college, they homogenize you. It's like joining the armed forces, right? I don't want to be homogenized. I want to be my own guy. So that was kind of like my thought process, or the excuse I told myself at the time when I couldn't afford college.
How did Robot Monster come about?
That was very interesting. Robot Monster was one of the first films I saw as a child. Early on, I remember it. I don't remember the Elmer Bernstein score as much as I did just that gorilla suit with the diving helmet, right? So I'm working. We're going to go back to videography studios, the same studios that brought me out to California, Bob Kiger. We were early experimenters in 3D video. Okay, and Robot Monster was shot in 3D. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No.
So what we did is we partnered up with a company called 3D Video, and at the time they were doing MTV specials. When MTV was new, before they even had music videos, they had these specials on, and some of them were in 3D, and you could go down. I don't know how they did this, but they distributed 3D glasses, and you could watch 3D programming from your home on MTV.
Right.
Well, we partnered up with 3D Video. They bought the rights to the 3D print. They had a pretty good 3D print of Robot Monster. And the running time for Robot Monster was way under. It was like 62 minutes. And they needed this to sit in a feature film time slot. So we came up with the idea of, hey, let's shoot extra footage. And this was very exciting to me and my friend Dave Nichols, who I grew up with, because he was working there too, and we looked at each other and went, oh my God, we can do this. So we wrote a script, and then after Dave and I wrote it, they brought in Steve D'Souza. Now, Steve D'Souza, I don't know if you know that name or not.
I do.
Yes, well, he came in and directed it and helped us rewrite it. And so we had costumes that we had used in a TV series called Starstruck, Leftover. So I had the Silver Lame kind of Lost in Space kind of costume. And then we hired Bob Burns, who was known for Tracy the Gorilla. And so he came in, and we had that helmet. What was his name? Don? I forget the guy's name who made the helmet, but we had him make a replica of the helmet for us. It's the only prop we had to have made because Bob had the gorilla suit. And so we shot all this extra footage in about 3 days, and which I think is more time than they shot the original film. We shot it all in 3D. Very silly comedy. But it went on MTV. And at the end, there's a song, by the way, at the end of Robot Monster, the special edition, which I found the recording of. It's like an old 50s song, so I'm going to release that at some point. And after what we put on the end of that reel or that movie, in order to really get it to a 90-minute running time, we put a music video there. It was one of the first music videos played on MTV. A lot of people think Video Killed the Radio Star was the first video, but I think our video was first because we were tagged on the end of this film, and it was before they were playing. Music videos on MTV. It took them a while to ramp up to that. So my video called Space Cadet, Remember the Future, you can look for it on YouTube, it's there somewhere, went on the end of Robot Monster, the special edition, as a tag bonus video that actually got aired on MTV so many years ago. I mean, this was like 1981 or 82.
Nice.
And so that's the story of Robot Monster. I think I have a full copy of it on DVD somewhere, but I don't know if that plays anymore.
Yeah, Steven D'Souza, he went on to write all the Joel Silver blockbusters.
Yeah, no, he went on to do the Schwarzenegger stuff, which we've always tried to get back together and do things together again, but he just got so busy. And then I got busy working on, after that, I worked on Fairy Tale Theater and then the Federated commercials. So we went our separate ways and never really got to work with each other again. But it was fun working with Steve and Bob Burns, Dave Nichols. We just had a blast making that show.
Yeah, Fairy Tale Theater, that was my favorite show when I was a kid. Tell me about working on that.
Oh, wow. I didn't do music on that. I did visual effects with the Kyoto Brothers. That's how I met the Kyoto Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with them quite a bit after that. I did the visual effects, and most of it was this. I was a video effects guy. And all the people working on Fairy Tale Theater were film people. Back in the day, in that time, video people and film people didn't even talk to each other. There was this huge rift between film and video because the film people looked down on the video people. That's just video. It's not as good as film. And they were right. It wasn't as good as film. But I knew the techniques that would work for both. Okay, matte paintings. There's no reason why you can't do a matte painting on video. Mm-hmm. There's no reason why you can't do cloud tank stuff. Okay, like Close Encounters clouds. I did a lot of that for Snow Queen. We created a cloud tank effect with matte paintings. And so I did a lot of these effects film effects using video, and that was my function on Fairy Tale Theater. I got to work with Tim Burton. Mm-hmm. I got to work with big stars would show up on the stage. Carrie Fisher, I have a photograph of her and I together on the blue screen stage.
Thumbelina.
Yeah, I did all that miniature stuff of the that you see of Thumbelina traveling through on the river on the lily pad. Mm-hmm. I shot that in Shelley's backyard. She had a creek in her backyard, and we went down there with the crew and prop makers, and we took dry ice and threw it in the creek and dressed the creek and had a snorkel camera that followed it. It was an amazing setup. And then, let's see, Snow Queen and then Aladdin. I worked on Aladdin too. Mm-hmm. That was Tim Burton. And it was just a blast back then because they couldn't afford the film effects. They were finishing on video, and I knew about video. So that's how that all worked out. And the Kyoto Brothers had worked in film. They hadn't worked in video either. So being a video guy in a film world was kind of valuable at that time.
Mm-hmm. Did you work on Pinocchio?
No, I didn't work on Pinocchio. I was around when it was being done. I mean, I was in and out of the offices. I remember it being done, but they only brought me in when they needed effects, like Little Mermaid. I did some effects for that. I actually directed the second unit on that. Because one of the big problems there was that they were in a huge shop at ABC Studios that was union. Everybody was union. I was never union. I was this little non-union independent guy that had to really watch myself because I couldn't touch anything when I walked into the set. If I touched something, I'd be slapped. Not really, not physically, but it was like, you can't touch that. You're not union. Oh, okay. So I'd walk away, and I did all these dirty looks. At the time, I was very young, and there were a lot of old-timers there, and they would give me these dirty looks.
Yeah.
Not really. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's this kid doing here? What does he know about blue screen? Well, I know a little bit about blue screen.
Did you feel then that Tim Burton was going to be one of the great directors?
I didn't know. I mean, he was certainly clever and had unusual ideas, and that's what I liked about him. He was more my age, so it was really nice to have somebody in there that I could talk to as it's like the Kyoto brothers and Tim. They had worked together too. So we were all it was a breath of fresh air when I wasn't working with a 40 or 50-year-old director, right? Mm-hmm. But Tim was very hands-on. He came down to the stage and helped me shoot a lot of the stuff. Okay? He was there with the Kyoto brothers. He was like I say, hands-on. He wanted to help physically. Mm-hmm.
How did you meet Jim Wynorski?
There's a story. I've told this thing a million times, but I'll tell it again. I was big by the time 1974 came around. I was a huge Ennio Morricone collector, but didn't have all the resources to get all the Morricone that I needed. So my good friend Jeff Caesar and I, we'd gone to high school together, the only way we had found what Ennio was scoring would be to take a bus downtown to the library in Miami and look through microfilms of the most recent Variety magazine. That's how I would track down Morricone. And it was very hard to put a list together of what he did, and even harder to see the films. So Jeff was visiting me when I had moved to Pennsylvania, and we took a drive to New York because that's where all the great record stores were. Colony Records, right across the street, right in the middle of Times Square, was my favorite destination. Because you walked in there and you'd see imports, amazing soundtrack imports that would blow your mind. Now, unfortunately, they were all overpriced. So there I am standing at one of the bins, the Morricone bin, which where else would they ever have a bin of Ennio Morricone in the United States? It's got to be in Times Square, right? So there I am. I find the Five-Man Army. Oh, my God, it was one of my favorite scores. I grab the album, and I hold it in the air and show my friend Jeff, who's across the record store. And a gentleman right next to me, his name is Mark Frank, looks at me and says, I know another Ennio Morricone collector. His name is Jim Wynorski. Would you like his address? And so we copied down his mailing address, sent him a letter saying, hey, we'd like to meet you because you know more about Ennio than we do. So Jim called us up immediately at my house, and I was just about to get married to a young lady named Bonnie. Mm-hmm. And we our honeymoon was in New York. So Jeff followed us to New York on our honeymoon, and on honeymoon night, Jim invited all of us over to listen to Ennio Morricone. So that's what I did on my first honeymoon night, was sit at Jim Wynorski's house with my friend Jeff listening to Ennio Morricone albums. I made it up to her later, but that's how I met Jim. It was indirect connection in a soundtrack collector store, a friend of his.
Yeah, Jim is such
Ever since then, we've been best friends. So.
Yeah, Jim is such a character. He's a really funny guy.
Yes, he is. He and I are getting ready to work together on something quite unusual. He's helping me by writing lyrics for some of this music I'm doing for a film called Psycho a Go-Go. Mm-hmm. I bring the other lyricists in too, but Jim is perfect for this because the period is the 1960s, and he loves that kind of music, so it's going to be very valuable. Mm-hmm. So we're still working together. I mean, that was 1974, and we're still working together,
Yeah, that's cool that you have that camaraderie.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention...
It all comes...
Mm-hmm. I'm going to mention movies that you've composed scores for. Tell me anything you remember about them.
Okay, if I don't remember something, please edit it out.
Okay.
Because there's some things I don't. So go ahead.
Chopping Mall.
Okay, that was really my first official score. I was directing television commercials at the time, and we were very prolific in putting out these commercials. We were doing 8 a week for a local store here called Federated Group. And Jim called me. We were already friends. He had already been at Roger Corman's for a few years doing promotion for Roger. He said, hey, Roger's going to let me direct the movie. Do you want to write the music for it? Because Jim knew that I was already tinkering on the synthesizer all these years, and I had shared my recordings with him.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, can you do a demo for chopping mall? So yeah, I did the demo, got the job, and I didn't know I didn't know I could do it. I just was playing. I didn't take it that seriously because I had a high-paying job directing television commercials. I didn't really need the little composing job, but I had so much fun, and I impressed even myself by what I could do. I said, wow, I didn't know I could do this. This is easier than directing, and I'm not a great director, okay? I don't like having to have that much responsibility, and I don't like having to bark at people. So when I got a little taste of scoring, it was like, wow, this is something I can do alone. I don't need an entourage around me questioning everything I do. So I guess psychologically, I started calling myself a composer instead of a director. And I still directed after that, but Chopping Mall was the first one. And that's the story of Chopping Mall.
Yeah, I love the score for that. It reminds me of like Depeche Mode and The Art of Noise. Did you draw inspiration from them?
Art of Noise. I loved Art of Noise. I loved that. I love that group.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of dance club techno vibe to it too.
And I was in the studio to another employee I was working with at doing the commercials. Chris Culverhouse was also a guitarist musician. Mm-hmm. So I think he did the guitar riff for me in the opening titles. But he was also very helpful as an engineer. I didn't know. I was just noodling around, and I didn't have much experience in sound. I was a video guy. So Chris kind of saw me through that, and then once I saw him do it, it was like, oh, that's not rocket science. I can do that. Mm-hmm. But now, having said all that, I don't mix my own material. I send it out to a gentleman who does all my mixing for me. It just sounds so much better because another 7 years after you've scored it is always a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Death Stalker 2.
Aha. That came right after. Wait, did I just Big Bag Mama 2 and then Death Stalker? I don't remember, but that's one where Jim calls me on the phone and says, Chuck, in 2 weeks I get on a plane to Chile or wherever he was going to do, Argentina. I don't know where he shot it, but somewhere down in South America. He said, I need 20 minutes worth of music because I'm going to post the movie down there, and I need a library. Mm-hmm. So I very quickly, on evenings, I put together a library. Jim likes spaghetti westerns, and he didn't really give me much direction on it. He just said, do whatever you want. It's a sword and sorcery epic. And so, I don't remember the process of actually sitting down and coming up with that theme, but I know I was going for an adventurous kind of writing, kind of like an outdoorsy action theme. And that's what came out. Like I said, I don't remember much in the process of creating Death Stalker 2 because it was a rush. It was like it wasn't a formal kind of score. It was like, hey, give me some music, Chuck. Here's a little bit of money. I think he just had a small amount of money for that. So it was kind of like, okay, here, take this, get on a plane. And he came back with Death Stalker 2, which was fantastic.
Not of this earth.
Not of this earth. Okay, so what I remember when I was scoring that was I just broken up with a girl, I think. Yeah, it was definitely a girl, because I'd never dated men. So I broke up. Her name was Mary, and it was a horrible breakup. And I remember being horribly depressed while writing that score. But the music itself, and that's why the music is a little bit happy, because I was trying to make myself happy. Mm-hmm. But I wanted a theremin. I wanted a real theremin that I could not afford or get or find at the time. So I programmed my little Casio CZ101 to be the theremin. And it still works beautifully. Actually, I just did a demo for a Netflix movie. Mm-hmm. I hope I get it. Where I did the same thing. I didn't have a theremin, so I just made one up. Right? right? You can just program it. It's one of the easiest sounds to program. But a real theremin would sound better, and I intend on at some point purchasing a real theremin. That's not of this earth. Like I say, all I can remember is I remember being really depressed but writing sort of happy music that made me happy, like the main title is kind of up. But Jim helped me, he would sit in there with me, and I'd play him a tune, he'd say, or I'd play him some themes, and he'd go, nah. I'd play him something else, nah. Then, it's always the third one, I'd play it and go, yeah, that's it, that's the theme. So I would actually pick out, with Not of This Earth, Jim was actually in the room when I picked out that melody.
Mm-hmm. My favorite score of yours is the Return to Swamp Thing.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
That was fun. That was probably, that was a big budget score. That's when I really thought I was headed up the world, right? Okay, they get some real money for this. So I brought in some real players. I brought in, brass players for that. I brought in the theme, the love theme has real recorder sounds from a friend of mine, Mark Lewis, who did the recorder for me. He did quite a few samples, and then I took those samples and I reused them over other scores too. I think those samples can be heard in the channeler.
Mm-hmm.
Where else did I use it? Anyway, so the Return to Swamp Thing was a lot of fun because it was, it's a comic. I love comics, and I love scoring for comics. Now, of course, my music is way different than the Marvel music, but for its time, I think it did the job. So that's all I remember, though. I'm trying to think of any interesting stories behind that. I know the love theme I had to shoot that several times before Jim liked it.
That's what I love.
But we eventually found something really good, which I like that theme.
It's got that sweet, earthy elegance to it, kind of like Peter Gabriel or Tangerine Dream.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Peter Gabriel influence, Tangerine Dream influence. I was listening to all that music comes out in my music. I was listening to Rick Wakeman. I was listening to ELO.
Mm-hmm.
The British rock and roll was a big influence on me, as was, of course, movie scores. And Ennio was always in the back of my mind for everything. So there's a lot of him there. And I guess that's where, I have no qualms about being influenced by other composers. Not at all. Where I've spoken to other composers who don't even want to acknowledge the fact that their style might be coming from somewhere else. I'm fine with that. It's half the fun is trying to be as good as the people you love, right?
Right. Did you use a shakuhachi flute on the love theme?
No, that's all recorder. That's all a recorder. 3 different kinds of recorders. He had an alto, a soprano, and just a regular recorder. But I still have the raw copy of the raw recording of the session. And we sat there for about 30 minutes, and he just went through every sound possible. I mean, there are samples I haven't used yet.
Yeah.
So you never know. Something still might show up. I recorded all those in 16-bit digital. So those recordings are as pristine as they were in 1989.
Mm-hmm. A guy is creative when he keeps all of his work that hasn't been seen or heard yet,
Well, there's some sounds in there, and there's a lot of my experiments that I haven't played or haven't used. I don't know why. I still have it, and someday I'll put it out there. But sometimes I go back and borrow ideas that I've never used before on films from some of my older recordings. I'm doing that right now with this project I really can't talk about yet because I have not been awarded the job.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going back to something. I wrote a Star Trek theme back in the basement of Shadow Stevens Studios after Chopping Ball. I did a theme that I thought would be good for Star Trek, the new generation, because it they were talking about doing this new Star Trek.
Yeah.
I said, on a lark, I'm going to write a theme. So I have that, and I'm reusing it for this other thing I'm doing now.
Nice.
So it's kind of fun.
How about Beverly Hills Vamp?
Now that was fun. That was my first job with Fred, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a special story about that one. Not about the actual scoring of it, but I've just been hired to shoot another Eddie Deason movie. And we're going to be shooting it in February in Cocoa Beach.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Tears of the Clown, and it's a horror comedy movie. We're bringing back a lot of the old timers that worked on some of these old films.
Mm-hmm.
Brink Stevens is directing it.
Nice.
And yeah, we just did a location scouting a couple days in Cocoa Beach last week, and I all these years I never got to know her. She's always just an actress playing in films I scored.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got to spend a couple days together, location scouting. She's just a great person. I cannot wait to get on stage with her, and where we're actually working together, and I'm shooting and she's directing.
Nice.
So that's all I remember. I can't give you much more about Beverly Hills Vamp, except I know Fred never gave me much time to do these things. It was always like, you got 5 days, you got 2 weeks, so I was always doing things rather quick. So that's it. I like the theme for Beverly Hills Vamp. It just everything was done so quick that a lot of it's very thin. But the score itself is very thin. There's not a lot of instruments.
Yeah, it reminds me.
Mob Boss is the same.
Yeah, it reminds me of the intro music of a Creature Features type of show. With that organ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was going for. I was going for something along the line. What was I thinking of? Dun, 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 dun. No, that was the other one. I don't know what I was thinking of, but I was thinking of like fun horror music from the 60s. Like I always went back to the Vic Mizzy stuff. Vic Mizzy.
Yeah, Addams Family.
Underrated composer.
Yeah, the Addams Family.
Underrated. Yes, yeah. A lot of great themes came out of that man, and people do not, his name is on nobody's lips that I know except for mine. So give him some credit for a lot of my influence on those wacky comedy themes.
Yeah. How about that Transylvania Twist?
That was a lot of fun. That was a lot of work because that was a parody of other horror movies, and I was parodying the music from all the horror movies too. So it was a real thrill to go through and make up, the actual music that goes with the movie. But then there were all these little bits in the movie that I had to score to. Plus, I got to write my first song, "Just Give Me Action," and think of the royalties, of which Jim wrote the lyrics for. So I harken back to that, where I'm writing songs with Jim right now, in this very moment. And "Just Give Me Action" was the first song we wrote together, which we are at some point going to re-record. Ford and Mark over at BSX are going to put out the new version of that song at some point, and hopefully I'm bringing back the original singer, Stephanie Stevens, who is still singing, and we're going to do a really cool arrangement of that, like redo it with big samples, and I don't have money for an orchestra, but we'll make it sound good.
Oh, cool.
Now that's Tranny Twist. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to work on. I couldn't believe every time I would get to a new reel in that movie, I'd go, I cannot believe this movie is getting better and better.
976.
And then get the big monster, the cucumber monster at the end. It's hilarious.
Oh, yeah. That whole movie is great. I mean, Robert Vaughn is great in it.
Oh, yeah. Robert Vaughn, I got to work with, he's in Little Devils, too, Witch Academy.
Oh, yeah.
So I got to score 2 movies with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was great. 976 Evil 2.
That was the first movie that I had enough money, that I put some of my fee, I should say, into a real orchestra. And that soundtrack just came out. I don't know if you have a copy or not.
No.
But you don't? Oh.
I should.
Yeah, you should. If you send me your address, I will send you some. I'll send you some CDs.
Okay.
Yeah, email me your address, and I can send that off to you.
Appreciate it, Chuck.
976 Evil was an interesting. The whole story of that is on the sleeve of the CD because it's a big sleeve, and basically this was when I had an orchestra, and Jim wanted a spaghetti western opening to a horror movie, and I'm going, I did it anyway. I wanted to give it something different, and Jim chose spaghetti western, so we did spaghetti western opening, and it turned out pretty good. That was another film where I got to do a lot of experimentation. I got to bring in an orchestra for some of the stuff. I did some. I was trying to do Twilight Zone. I was trying to do that Jerry Goldsmith music from Twilight Zone in that movie. So there are a few cues on that CD. You're going to go, wow, that's what Jerry did in Twilight Zone.
I didn't even realize Jerry Goldsmith did the Twilight Zone theme.
Yeah, he didn't do the theme, but he did do some of the cues for that show.
Oh, okay.
And aficionados know which is what he did and what other people did. I don't know, but I know he did. I think Bernard Herrmann even did cues for that show. But Jerry had a cue they used in a lot of the episodes that I kind of didn't copy it. I did my own version of it. It's the first thing on the album, actually.
Yeah.
So it was just that quintessential Twilight Zone sound. It's a harp, very simple instruments, but beautifully written themes. I've got this thing about themes. If you don't have a theme, you don't have a score. Now, certainly there are movies that don't need themes and do better with ambient scores, but the total lack of a theme for movies that should have themes kind of blows my mind that people get away with that nowadays. There were no laws written, and the U.S. Constitution does not have anything about movie music in it. So.
Ghoulies 4.
Huh?
Ghoulies 4.
Ghoulies 4. That was fun too. Okay, that was during the heyday of one movie after another. And Jim said, do something like Munchie Strikes Back, which I had done for Rogers Company. And so I gave him something darker than Munchie. And the whole score was kind of dark. It was also one of these scores where instead of trying to go totally orchestral sounding with synths, that I let the synths be synths. And so that score had a lot of electronicness in it, if that's a word, electronicness.
Yeah. I like those dinging noises. They're fun.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was experimenting with all kinds of stuff. I just wrote a cue yesterday that was a little reminiscent of that music. I like putting in the little comedic flourishes. That's something that whenever my favorite composers would do a comedy, they would do it that way. And so that's why I'm kind of like, that's why I like that.
How about doing sound design on Killer Clowns from Outer Space?
Well, that's an interesting story. I was in transition there. We had just abandoned the studios that I had done, the Shadow Stevens studios. I no longer had access to those studios. So I bought a couple of his synths, and I was trying to find a place to put together a studio at the time. Now, both John Massari and I were up to score it. John got the gig because he had done something else that sounded much more like what they needed. And totally great. He wrote a fabulous score, which, by the way, I helped them with his concert, his live concert. I actually shot that for him. So John and I are good friends. They came to me afterwards, after the movie was done, and said, Chuck, we need a bunch of custom sound effects. And we know that, you can do that kind of thing. So I had half a system put together. I was just about ready to score, I think, another film, and I had put this skeleton scoring stage together that wasn't quite ready yet. So I used that. I used all my synthesizers in tandem to come up with those sound effects for Killer Clowns. And of course, it was all going, everything was instigated or influenced by the visuals I saw. There was nothing like Killer Clowns, ever. And it was a lot of fun to go there and do tonalities that were not musical, kind of presence that the clowns have that really was kind of alien, wacky, funny.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So John and I just had a meeting a couple weeks ago about doing a Kickstarter to help finance the remix of the new score music into a Blu-ray version of Killer Clowns that would also include an isolated sound effects track. So John is not done with Killer Clowns.
Yeah.
Neither is Killer Brothers. Apparently, there's still possibility of a sequel.
Yeah, I just had John on earlier this month, and he was telling me about that.
Yeah. Oh, he's telling you the same stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I really love what John's doing in social media and punching up the clown vibe. He's really keeping that alive to a lot of people out there. So.
I know, because I go to conventions and I just see people are still, obsessed with this movie.
As well they should be.
Yeah.
I still think it's better than all these new clown movies. It does not scare me. I'm sorry. There's nothing about that film that scares me. It's too slick.
Yeah.
The thing about horror movies is not to be slick, okay? Because if you're not slick, it feels real. When you're slick, it feels like, oh, I'm watching a movie. And that's what's great about B movies is they're not slick. They're rough around the edges, and I lose myself into a B movie much faster than one of these A movies that looks like a homogenized work of art, which really isn't because a committee did it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's great about B movies. B movies are individual artists' visions. Individual artists. A movies are not. They may say they've got a director, big director, that's his vision, but that's not really the case when you step back. He may be the guiding force, or she may be the guiding force of the movie, but there's a lot of other art from other people that go into A movies. B movies, not so. It's only a few people pulling something off that's close to impossible. So there I am, telling you all about the movies.
That's a good way of putting it. I'm not a big fan of a lot of mainstream movies either. Now,
yeah, I mean they're okay, they're fun, but you don't go away feeling like you saw something special because it was easy for them. They had the money to do it.
Mm-hmm. Now you've worn many hats in the industry. What do you like doing the most?
Music. Sitting there doing. There's nothing better than sitting there doing music. I mean, it's instant gratification because even if it's not in the movie yet, you're still listening to it, going, wow, I really feel good about what I just did. When I'm shooting, there's no time. When I'm shooting on a set with a crew and a director over my shoulder, there's no time to sit there and feel good about yourself. Okay? There's no time. You're under the gun. Same thing goes when you're editing. You've got somebody over your shoulder. You're under the gun. You've got to make this look good. People are going to make a ton of changes to it, even though you're working your butt off today, right? With music, not many people understand how it works or feel. Directors don't really feel what composers feel when they do this. Mm-hmm. That's why it's important for them to have a good communication between each other. So when you're doing music, you have this instant gratification of, wow, that felt good. And you're alone because you don't usually write with people over your shoulder. I've written with people over my shoulder before, but there's something about the instant gratification and the feel-good aspects of writing music because you can invent constantly or reinvent, take other ideas and use them in your ideas and create something new. And the process is, for me, is much more gratifying than having a crew or a committee putting something together.
Mm-hmm. But do you at least still get a kick out of directing when you do it?
Say that again, please.
Do you at least still get a kick out of directing when you do it?
No. I get a kick out of cutting what I direct, but when I'm on set directing, my heart is in my throat. I'm usually trying to think of 100 things at the same time. when I get the dailies back and I cut them together, and I'm alone again and I can experiment.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the joy comes in, the editing. And then, of course, I've always got my music library on the side, so I can always go in and see how a piece of music will sound. And you'd be surprised, you could take 10 different pieces of music and put it over the same scene, and it makes it work in different ways. And I don't know why people don't talk about that more. People talk about, oh, that music isn't working in that scene that I just saw. I said, well, no, it worked fine. It just didn't work the way you wanted it to.
Yeah.
You can. I call it random sync. You can take like 5 pieces of music, put it over the same scene, and it tunes it one way or the other. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does.
Okay.
So, do you have any upcoming projects that you can talk about that you want to plug?
Sure. I can't talk about one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have it yet, but it's the big one. So you can cut that out completely because if it doesn't happen, I'll feel like an idiot. I'm doing 5 songs and probably the score for Psycho A Go-Go. And this is a horror comedy that's a musical that takes place in the 60s, 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a period thing, and I'm writing 5 60s-style songs in the same tradition as Rocky Horror Picture Show or Phantom of the Paradise.
Oh, love it.
Which I love those songs in those movies.
Yeah, I do too.
So I'm really nitpicking my work on this. I'm bringing the best lyricist in I can find. And right now, I've got Jim Wynorski willing to do this, and he's probably going to hit it out of the ballpark. But I also want to include my son, who's a fabulous lyricist as well. We'll see what happens. But that's one. Psycho A Go-Go I'm working on these songs now, and we're going to we have an Elvis song in here. We're going to be getting an Elvis impersonator. So I'm going to be writing an Elvis song. We don't know what it is yet. But the first song I'm writing is in the tradition of the Ronettes and Be My Baby.
Nice.
And I'm doing my own take on it. I've got a vocalist right now doing a demo for me, and I can't wait to hear what she sounds like.
I can
So
imagine.
this is exciting. Doing the Rocky Horror or Phantom of the Paradise vibe songs is something that I had a wish for last year, because I see all these like Alan Menken getting big Academy Awards for all these Disney songs. I'm going, man, I want to write a song for a movie. Now I've got 5 songs. My wish came true. So it's maybe a B movie, and not as many people will see it, but it's my time to write a song. There's 5 of them.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be no easy task, writing a song in the style of someone else.
Yeah, well, it's in the 60s. I mean, it's a tough era because it was so simple.
Yeah.
And I tend to elaborate quite a bit. So I'm not going to hold back on the elaboration. Is that a word, elaboration? I believe it the first time. It's so out there.
Wow, I'm looking forward to seeing that when it comes out and stuff.
Yeah, well, figure they're shooting in March.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be a year from March before it's actually out, or maybe next Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Guessing it could be out, but it's whacked out from the director of Bloody Bible Camp, so it can't be bad. I've seen the trailer for. If you get a chance, check out the trailer for Bloody Bible Camp. It's hilarious.
Okay.
I haven't seen the film yet, but I haven't checked that out. But anyway, very unusual sense of humor, which I love in a movie.
Nice.
Because sometimes the sense of humor. Sometimes movies try to be funny with clever but not good dialogue.
Yeah.
Or not funny. But sometimes you've got to have a good. When you're doing quirky comedy, you've got to have a director who understands it, and Vito definitely understands it. So that's why I feel happy about this project. The other one I think I told you about already is the one I'll be DP on, director of photography, and that's called Tears of a Clown with Ed Deason.
Yeah.
Directed by Brink Stevens, that's in Florida. I'll probably be scoring that too. And for now, those are the 2 that I can tell you about.
Nice. Well, Chuck, I hope they go very successful for you, and I thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome, and please take a knife to a lot of this stuff and cut out my crap. Please done, and when you put it up, and I don't need to approve anything. I don't think I said anything harmful.
No.
And send me your address, and I'll pop some CDs in the mail to you.
Absolutely. I will definitely send you my address, and I appreciate it so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Good luck with your show, and continued success on it.
Thank you so much, Chuck, and happy Halloween and the rest of your holidays, and have a great day.
You too now. You have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Chuck Cirino. Ain't he a cool dude? Really nice guy, really great stories about music, and a great way to kick off the first episode of the last day of Halloween October on Halloween. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.